No one at Evercrest Academy expected much from Maya Carter. Not the professors with polished accents. Not the students who carried their family names like trophies. And certainly not Professor Lennox, the man who believed that talent could be measured by pedigree. He stood near the stage one bright morning and whispered to a colleague, "She's never even touched a violin before." His tone wasn't cruel, only certain. Around him, the school's wealthy donors laughed softly, sipping coffee from china cups engraved with the Academy crest. To them, Maya was an experiment. A scholarship student from the city who had somehow stepped into a world not built for her. A moment of entertainment before the real performers began. They didn't know what was about to happen. When Maya stepped from behind the curtain, her heart beat in her ears. The violin waiting for her gleamed under the lights like something sacred. She had heard their whispers in the hallway, the quiet jokes, the disbelief that someone like her could belong in a place like this. The plan was simple. Hand her the violin, let her fumble through a few notes, and remind everyone that Evercrest's greatness was not for everyone. But what came next would silence the entire room. Before that unforgettable moment, the story began 3 weeks earlier. Maya arrived at Evercrest in the middle of the semester, suitcase in one hand and a letter of acceptance folded carefully in her pocket. The campus stretched before her like a kingdom made of red brick and ambition. Towers reached for the sky. Ivy clung to ancient walls and the sound of string instruments drifted through open windows. Students in pressed uniforms walked in perfect lines. They glanced at her, then away, as if she were a reflection they didn't want to acknowledge. At the main building entrance, a girl with flawless posture stopped her. "Excuse me, are you looking for the admissions office?" "I'm already admitted," Maya said softly. The girl blinked, then smiled with polite confusion. "Oh, I see. Welcome, then." It wasn't unkind, just unfamiliar. Maya had felt this before, the pause between acceptance and exclusion when people tried to decide which box you belonged in. Her first class was music theory. She entered late, choosing a seat in the far corner. The classroom smelled of polished wood and chalk dust. At the front stood Professor Lennox, tall and silver-haired, his suit perfectly pressed. He spoke about harmony and mathematics, about how genius lay in order. His voice filled the room like a symphony that tolerated no wrong notes. "Who can explain the structure of Bach's violin fugue in G minor?" he asked, hands shot up. Maya's stayed down. Instead, her fingers traced the edge of the desk, remembering the texture of her grandfather's violin, the instrument she'd grown up hearing but rarely touching. Her family couldn't afford lessons, yet music had always been the air she breathed. Her grandfather, Samuel Carter, had played for decades in jazz clubs that no longer existed. His hands had shaped melodies for other people's fame. "Keep your gift close," he used to say. "They can't take what they don't see coming." After class, Professor Lennox stopped her at the door. "You're the new transfer, yes?" His smile was polite but distant. "I understand your previous training was unconventional." Maya nodded. "I'll do my best to keep up." "I'm sure you will," he said. "Just remember, excellence here is tradition, not aspiration." She understood the warning beneath the words. That night she explored the practice building after hours. The hallways were silent except for the faint hum of heating pipes. She found a small room at the very end, one no one seemed to use. Inside was an old piano and a cracked mirror. She unpacked her violin case, a worn instrument passed down through her family. When she played the first note, the sound filled the room with warmth and grief. Every vibration seemed to awaken ghosts in the walls. Her bow trembled at first, but then confidence grew. What poured out wasn't polished but alive, music shaped by memory, not instruction. In that moment, she wasn't a scholarship student or an outsider. She was simply Maya, the granddaughter of a man who had played his truth when the world refused to listen. Unknown to her, someone had been listening now. The next afternoon, in the campus library, an older woman behind the desk watched Maya approach. Her name tag read Mrs. Collins. Her eyes held the calm curiosity of someone who noticed everything. "I heard music in the East Wing last night," she said, sliding a book across the counter. "After hours, it was remarkable." Maya froze. "That wasn't me." "Of course," Mrs. Collins said, still smiling. "Still, this book might interest whoever it was." Maya glanced down. Advanced violin techniques. Historical interpretations. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Talent rarely waits until it's ready, the librarian replied. Take it, your grandfather would approve. Maya's breath caught. You knew him? I heard him play once. Many years ago. He played like the music had been waiting for him all its life. For the first time since arriving, Maya felt seen not as a project or a statement, but as a musician. The challenge appears the following week. Professor Lennox announced the annual charity showcase. Our donors expect excellence, he said, scanning the room. Only the best will represent Evercrest. His gaze drifted past Maya as though she were invisible. He selected 4 students for the featured quartet, all legacy students with famous surnames. Their leader, Adrian Wells, smiled confidently as his name was called. We'll perform Vivaldi's Summer, he announced, his tone suggesting destiny rather than opportunity. Maya's hands twitched. She knew that piece. Her grandfather had played it differently, fiercer, freer, like a thunderstorm that refused to stay in rhythm. Something amusing, Miss Carter? Professor Lennox's voice cut through the silence. She stilled. No, sir. Then perhaps you'd care to share your thoughts on Vivaldi's interpretation. Every head turned. Maya hesitated. I just think music can tell different stories depending on who plays it. Adrian smirked. That's assuming the player can tell any story at all. The class laughed quietly. Professor Lennox nodded. Theory is one thing, Miss Carter. Execution is another. His words settled like dust, final and heavy. No one knew that Maya had already made a decision. She would no longer hide her light. That night, the corridors of Evercrest were empty, but Maya's mind was anything but still. She replayed every smirk, every whisper, every word of doubt. Beneath it all was the echo of her grandfather's voice telling her that one day, her moment would come. She just hadn't expected it to arrive like this. 3 days before the fundraiser, Professor Lennox called for a special rehearsal. The auditorium glowed under harsh white lights as Adrian and his polished quartet prepared to perform. Maya sat in the back row with her notebook open, pretending to study, though her eyes were fixed on the stage. Lennox's voice carried with the authority of a man used to being obeyed. From the beginning. Remember, precision is not enough. Our patrons appreciate artistry, not arithmetic. The music began crisp and flawless. Every note landed exactly where it should, but something was missing. The piece sounded like a cage, beautiful yet lifeless. Maya closed her eyes and remembered the way her grandfather had played the same piece, his bow attacking the strings with wild energy. He had called it the language of storms, the sound of freedom breaking through rules. Without realizing, Maya began to hum under her breath, her fingers tracing invisible strings across her thigh. The sound was soft, but it carried. The quartet stumbled, breaking rhythm. Adrian frowned. Who's making that noise? He snapped. Professor Lennox's gaze swept the room and stopped on her. Miss Carter, do you have something to add? The entire auditorium fell silent. Maya hesitated. No, sir. I didn't mean to interrupt. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. On the contrary, it seems you have strong opinions. Please share them with us. Her heartbeat roared in her ears. I only thought that the storm section could use more contrast. More tension before it resolves, Adrian laughed. And you're the expert on Baroque performance now? I didn't say that, she replied evenly. Lennox tilted his head, intrigued. Perhaps Miss Carter believes she can demonstrate a more appropriate interpretation. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a trap dressed as opportunity. I was only observing, Maya said, gathering her books. I shouldn't have spoken. Nonsense, Lennox interrupted, theatrically generous. We value all perspectives here. In fact, this could be an excellent chance to show our donors the range of Evercrest's talent. Miss Carter, you'll perform at the showcase. The words hit her like cold rain. Adrian's grin spread slowly. Wonderful idea, sir. Everyone deserves their moment in the spotlight. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in sound, it was worse. It was certain. Thank you, Maya said quietly. What piece should I prepare? Something simple, Lennox said. We wouldn't want to overwhelm you. Adrian raised a hand with mock helpfulness. Maybe Paganini's Caprice No. 24, since she's so passionate about interpretation. The room erupted again. Lennox's eyes gleamed. Excellent suggestion. Though ambitious, of course. You're welcome to choose something within your skill level, Miss Carter. Maya looked up, her voice steady. Paganini's 24th will be fine. A flicker of surprise crossed the professor's face before he smiled. Then it settled. You'll perform after the quartet. When she left the auditorium, their laughter followed her down the hall like a shadow. That night, she unpacked her violin and stared at it in silence. Paganini's 24th wasn't just hard. It was legendary. So difficult that even masters stumbled through it. 3 days wasn't enough time for anyone to master it. But Maya wasn't just anyone. She had a gift her grandfather called the ear of memory. She could hear something once and play it again. Not perfectly, but truthfully. The next morning, she began before sunrise. Her fingers trembled at first. The music was furious, demanding, relentless. Each variation was a mountain of impossible precision. After 2 hours, her hands ached, but she refused to stop. By noon, she was still struggling with the 4th variation when the door opened. Mrs. Collins stepped inside, holding 2 coffee cups. "I thought I might find you here." Maya lowered her violin. "How did you know?" "News travels quickly among people who underestimate others," the librarian said gently. She handed her the coffee. Paganini's 24th, quite the challenge. "It wasn't exactly my choice," Mrs. Collins studied her. "Your grandfather played that piece once at a competition in New York. The judges couldn't believe what they were hearing." Maya blinked. "He never told me that." "They gave the prize to someone else," the librarian said softly. "Someone with the right last name. He never competed again after that. But I kept the recording." She reached into her bag and placed an old flash drive on the piano. "If you want to know how he really played it, listen to this." When Mrs. Collins left, Maya plugged the drive into the small library computer. The sound that came through the speakers wasn't perfect, it cracked and hissed with age, but the emotion was alive. Her grandfather's version of Paganini was wild and soulful, full of rebellion. It wasn't about showing off skill. It was about breaking free. That night, Maya practiced until her fingers bled. By the second day, her exhaustion turned to rhythm. By the third, it became fire. When she didn't appear at the rehearsal, the rumors started instantly. Students whispered that she had quit. Adrian joked that she'd probably forgotten which end of the bow to use. Professor Lennox smirked but said nothing. They didn't know that Maya was in the old East Wing practicing until the sun rose. When the night before the fundraiser arrived, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the violin beside her. Fear and excitement twisted together in her chest. Her phone buzzed with a message from her mother. "Remember, music isn't about proving them wrong. It's about saying something true." That line anchored her. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Then I'll tell the truth." The morning of the performance came too soon. Evercrest Grand Hall was transformed into a sea of gold light, velvet seats, and murmuring guests. Donors in elegant clothes filled the aisles. Professor Lennox stood near the stage, shaking hands with important names, smiling as if everything was under control. Maya stood behind the curtain, clutching her violin. Her palms were slick with sweat. She could hear the quartet playing their flawless Vivaldi on stage. The audience applauded with polite admiration. Then came the intermission. Professor Lennox's voice filled the hall. "And now for something different," he announced, his words floating with condescension. "Please welcome one of our newest scholarship students, Miss Maya Carter, who will attempt Paganini's Caprice No. 24. The word attempt lingered in the air like a smirk. Maya took a breath that reached her bones and stepped into the light. The crowd clapped politely. Adrian watched from the wings, phone in hand, ready to record her downfall. She positioned her violin. The world fell silent. Then she played the first note. It was not a student's note. It was a declaration. A bold ringing G that filled the room like a thunderclap. Professor Lennox blinked. His smile faltered. The next phrase followed, precise, powerful, alive. The room held its breath. No one knew yet that everything about Evercrest Academy was about to change forever. The sound that came from Maya's violin didn't ask for permission. It filled the air like truth breaking through glass. The first few measures shimmered, bold and commanding. The donors who had leaned back expecting awkward fumbling now straightened in their seats. Her bow moved with authority, her fingers steady and sure. The tone was clean, each note clear as crystal. It wasn't the sound of a nervous student. It was the sound of someone who had waited her whole life to be heard. Professor Lennox's face changed slowly, his certainty slipping away with every phrase. He had expected hesitation, maybe a few wrong notes. What he heard instead was mastery, raw and undeniable. Adrian lowered his phone, forgotten in his hand. The smirk he'd carried for weeks dissolved as the music surged. Maya was inside the music now, her eyes closed, her body swaying slightly. The second variation arrived and her double stops rang like bells. The difficulty of the passage was something even trained professionals feared, but she played with calm control, the bow gliding as if carried by the sound itself. The hall grew still. Even the air seemed to pause to listen. In the third variation, her bow began to dance, skipping across the strings with a rhythm that built tension. Every movement of her wrist spoke confidence. The crowd's disbelief turned to wonder, then to silence so complete that the faint hum of the stage lights seemed loud. A murmur rose among the front row where the visiting conductor, an older man with silver hair, leaned forward, eyebrows raised. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes gleamed with the thrill of recognition. He knew brilliance when he heard it. By the fifth variation, Maya had left behind everything Evercrest thought it knew about perfection. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing like someone reclaiming a stolen name. Her grandfather's voice was with her, steady, quiet, guiding. Don't play to fit their ears. Play to wake their hearts, she did. The piece grew fiercer, wilder. The violin became her second voice, shouting, whispering, demanding to be heard. Each variation unfolded like a confession, grief, anger, hope, all woven together. The 10th variation came like thunder. Her fingers leapt across the fingerboard with impossible speed. The octave jumps were flawless, the intonation pure. Somewhere near the back, a student gasped quietly, realizing the impossibility of what she was hearing. Professor Lennox sat motionless. His hands gripped the edge of his chair. The hierarchy he'd built with precision and pride was cracking in real time. By the 13th variation, the sound turned soft, delicate, almost otherworldly. The harmonics floated through the hall like silver smoke. People who had come to sip champagne and applaud polite talent now sat frozen, breathless. The visiting conductor closed his eyes for a moment, letting the purity of her tone wash over him. When he opened them, the expression on his face was not just admiration, it was reverence. Then came the storm. Variations 16 through 20 roared through the hall with energy that defied explanation. Maya's bow struck and lifted like lightning, her fingers a blur of determination. Every measure was a rebellion against silence. The donors could feel it. The students felt it too, the raw proof that greatness didn't need permission or heritage to exist. Adrian's hand trembled. He looked at her with something new in his eyes. Respect, yes, but also a kind of shame. He had wanted her to fail. Instead, he was witnessing a kind of truth he couldn't deny. When Maya reached the final variation, the music became both victory and farewell. She wasn't showing skill anymore. She was telling a story, one of a family erased and now reborn through her hands. The final run blazed across the strings, furious and brilliant, before resolving into that last shimmering note. It hung in the air, pure and full, vibrating through every wall, every heartbeat, and then there was silence. No one moved. No one breathed. For 3 long seconds, the world stood still. Then the visiting conductor rose to his feet, clapping once, twice, before the entire hall erupted in applause so powerful it echoed like thunder. Maya lowered her bow slowly. Her breath trembled, but her face stayed calm. She hadn't played for their praise. She had played for the truth of the sound. Professor Lennox stood stiffly, eyes down, his world rearranging itself. Around him, donors applauded, shouting words of astonishment. Extraordinary, someone whispered. Impossible, another said. The applause kept growing, swelling like a wave that wouldn't stop. The visiting conductor walked toward the stage with purposeful steps, his expression open, almost awed. When he reached her, he extended his hand. That was not an attempt, he said clearly. That was revelation. The audience went silent again, hanging on every word. Maya shook his hand, her violin still in her other. Thank you, sir. What is your name? He asked. Maya Carter. He nodded slowly. I've been conducting for 30 years. I've never heard a student performance like that. Who taught you? Before she could answer, Professor Lennox stepped forward, his smile too tight. Miss Carter is new to Evercrest. Her background is unconventional. The conductor turned sharply toward him. Unconventional? That was genius, Professor. Genius doesn't need pedigree. Lennox's jaw flexed. We only recently discovered her abilities. Discovered? The conductor's eyes narrowed. You nearly buried them, the audience murmured. The board members shifted in their seats. Maya looked at them both. My grandfather taught me. Samuel Carter. The conductor blinked. Samuel Carter? You knew him? I knew of him, he said quietly. Your grandfather's recordings shaped a generation of musicians even if his name never appeared on the covers. Lennox looked blank. The conductor's tone grew sharp. Perhaps you should have read her file. The tension broke when a board member stood, clapping again. A performance worth remembering, he said. The applause rose anew, even louder than before. Maya's hands trembled as she held her violin close. This was no longer about one performance. It was the breaking of a barrier that had stood too long. The conductor turned to the crowd. You've all witnessed something rare tonight. True excellence doesn't need invitation or approval. It simply is. The hall erupted again, louder this time, cheers rising above applause. Professor Lennox stood alone, his certainty turned to silence. Maya stepped off stage as the conductor followed her. Miss Carter, he said softly, this is only the beginning. She nodded, her voice steady. I know. Behind them, the applause still echoed, proof that no wall, no expectation, no prejudice could hold back a sound that was meant to be heard. The applause that shook the hall still echoed through Maya's bones long after she stepped into the corridor. Behind her, voices swelled, conversations sparked like fireworks, and the sound of admiration mixed with disbelief. The world that had once looked through her now couldn't stop looking. She leaned against the cool wall backstage, her breath uneven, her hands trembling around the violin that had just rewritten everything they thought they knew about her. The door opened and the visiting conductor stepped through, followed by Professor Lennox, whose face carried the look of a man watching the ground shift beneath him. Miss Carter, the conductor said, his voice calm but filled with awe. That performance was extraordinary. I've listened to hundreds of interpretations of Paganini, but none with that kind of honesty. Who did you study under? My grandfather, she said. Samuel Carter. Recognition flickered in his eyes. Samuel Carter from the New Orleans Sessions? I know that name. A ghost behind half the music of the 20th century. Maya nodded. He taught me that sound can carry truth even when names can't. The conductor turned to Lennox, his tone soft but sharp. How did you not see what you had in front of you? Lennox didn't answer. His jaw moved, but no words came. The conductor looked back at Maya. There's a position in our youth conductor program at the State Symphony. It's usually reserved for conservatory graduates, but exceptions are made for brilliance. Would you consider it? Maya's heart stopped for a beat. Yes, she said. I'd be honored, he smiled. Good, because you've earned more than applause. You've earned a place. As he left, the hall lights dimmed behind them. Professor Lennox remained where he was, silent, his expression unreadable. Finally, he said quietly, Miss Carter, I underestimated you. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. You didn't underestimate me, she said softly. You never looked. He gave a slow nod, a small acknowledgement of defeat or awakening. It was hard to tell. When she walked into the reception hall that evening, every head turned. Conversations stopped. Donors approached her, shaking her hand, their voices filled with words like brilliant and unforgettable. The same people who had once doubted her now wanted to be seen standing beside her. Adrian appeared from the crowd, no phone, no smirk. His face was pale, his confidence gone. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. I thought you'd fall apart. I wanted you to. But that performance, he paused, searching for words. It changed something. Maya looked at him and said only, then maybe it did what it was meant to do. He nodded, shame mixing with gratitude. If you ever want to play with us, we'd be lucky to have you. Across the room, Mrs. Collins stood near the refreshment table, her smile small but knowing. Maya walked to her, relief flooding through her chest. You were right, she said. He was with me the whole time. I know, Mrs. Collins replied. You played for both of you tonight. The board chairman approached then, flanked by other faculty. Miss Carter, he said warmly, we'd like to speak with you about a new initiative. The Evercrest program could use more outreach, something that helps young musicians from public schools. We'd like you to help us build it. Lennox stood behind them, silent. His eyes, once cold, now held something else, respect laced with discomfort. I'd like that, Maya said. But only if it's not charity. It should be recognition. The chairman smiled. Recognition it is. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the music hall. For the first time since she'd arrived, the school didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like possibility. When she entered her practice room, the air smelled of polish and paper, but also of something new. Expectation. Her violin sat waiting on the table, the wood still warm from the night before. Professor Lennox appeared in the doorway. You have a moment? He asked. Maya nodded. I've been speaking with the board, he said. They want to fund the mentorship program we discussed last night. I told them you should have a leadership role. You'll be reviewing applicants from the city schools. She blinked, surprised. You're serious? He nodded. Completely. He hesitated, then added, I also reviewed your grandfather's old recordings. You were right. He wasn't just talented. He was revolutionary. He just never had the stage, Maya said. Then perhaps you'll help others find one. It wasn't an apology in words, but it was one in meaning. That afternoon, the same hallway that once whispered with judgment now echoed with congratulations. Students she barely knew smiled at her. Some asked if she'd teach them phrasing techniques. Even Adrian stopped her between classes to ask how she'd learned her bow control. It's not control, she said. It's release. By the end of the week, her name appeared on the official schedule for the new mentorship initiative, recognition program directed by Maya Carter. In the evenings, she stayed in the East Wing practice room, not to hide anymore but to remember. She played pieces her grandfather had taught her, mixing them with her own. Each note was a thank you, a promise, and a beginning. Weeks passed. The recognition program brought new faces to the campus, students from public schools, some holding instruments for the first time. Maya guided them through scales and melodies, watching their eyes light up when they made sound for the first time. One afternoon, a girl about 12 lingered after class, shy and quiet. Miss Carter, she said, I've never played before, but I think I want to. Maya smiled. Then you should. She handed her the same violin that had changed everything. The girl's first note wavered and cracked, but her smile didn't. Feels good? The girl whispered. It always does, Maya said, even when it scares you. That night, as the halls emptied, Maya stood alone in the auditorium where it had all begun. The seats were dark, but she could still see that night in her mind. The disbelief, the silence, the moment before everything changed. Her grandfather's words echoed again. When your moment comes, don't just shine. Blind them. She lifted the violin one more time and began to play. The sound rose through the empty hall strong and sure, filling every corner of the space that had once rejected her. Evercrest would never sound the same again. A year passed before anyone at Evercrest realized that what happened that night had become legend. New students whispered about it before they ever saw the stage. They called it the night the music changed. Maya had gone from a scholarship transfer to the center of a quiet revolution. Her name appeared on program posters beside the Evercrest crest itself, not as a token but as proof of what the school could be when it listened. The mentorship initiative she had built, the one she had insisted be called the recognition program, grew faster than anyone predicted. Every Saturday morning, buses rolled through the campus gates carrying children from every part of the city. They filled the music rooms with chatter and nervous laughter, clutching borrowed violins, dented flutes, and keyboards missing keys. Maya met each of them by name. She remembered what it had felt like to be invisible. She promised herself that no one under her guidance would ever feel that way again. The program became her second heartbeat. Professor Lennox, once her skeptic, now arrived early to observe the sessions. He never said it out loud, but his presence was his apology renewed each week. He brought coffee for the volunteers, tuned instruments for the children, and occasionally smiled when one of them nailed a difficult passage. Sometimes he lingered at the door as Maya taught, watching the unselfconscious joy of a room full of kids learning to make sound for the first time. He would nod to himself, quietly acknowledging that this, more than any prize or scholarship, was the real purpose of music education. One afternoon, during a break, He approached Maya. "You've changed this place," he said. She wiped resin dust from her fingers. "Maybe. Or maybe we just reminded it what music is supposed to mean." He looked around at the room full of students. "And what's that?" "Connection," she said simply. "Before there's applause or prestige, there's just sound trying to find someone who understands it." The following month, the State Symphony invited Maya to guest conduct their spring showcase. When she stepped onto the podium, baton trembling in her hand, she could feel her grandfather's weight and warmth behind her. The orchestra waited for her cue. She gave the first downbeat. The strings came in like a tide, unified and bright. The music swelled until the entire hall trembled with sound. When it ended, the applause rolled forward like thunder again, but this time she met it differently. It wasn't disbelief she saw in the faces below. It was recognition. Afterward, the conductor she had met that first night, Mr. Holloway, found her backstage. "You've grown," he said with pride. "Do you ever think back to that night at Evercrest?" "Every day," she replied. "It reminds me what happens when you give someone a stage instead of a label." He smiled. "Keep giving them stages." When summer arrived, Evercrest hosted its first recognition gala, a showcase for the young musicians in Maya's program. The main hall, once a fortress of formality, now buzzed with laughter and anticipation. The walls were decorated not with crests and portraits, but with photographs of the students themselves. Parents filled the rows. Donors sat among them, no longer in segregated sections. On stage, a boy no older than 9 stood holding a violin almost as tall as he was. His hands shook until he saw Maya at the side of the stage. She nodded once and his bow steadied. When he finished his piece, the room erupted in applause. The boy's mother cried openly. Maya clapped hardest of all. Later that evening, as the crowd dispersed, she wandered the quiet corridors of the music hall. The same corridors where she had once walked invisible, now echoed with the hum of students cleaning up instruments. Chatting, laughing, belonging. She entered the old East Wing room, the place where it had all begun. The cracked mirror still leaned against the wall, but the air felt lighter now, the darkness replaced by history and possibility. She opened her violin case, touched the smooth wood, and whispered, "We did it, Grandpa." A soft voice came from behind her. It was Mrs. Collins. "You did more than that," she said. "You started something that won't stop when you leave." Maya smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." Mrs. Collins stepped forward, handing her a small package wrapped in worn paper. "This was his," she said. "Your grandfather left it with me years ago. He told me to give it to you when you were ready." Maya opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of handwritten music. At the top, in faded ink, it read, "Freedom in D minor." She recognized the handwriting immediately. The melody was simple, almost fragile, yet something about it shimmered with unfinished promise. She carried it to the main stage that night when everyone had gone home. Under the dim stage lights, she lifted her violin and began to play the piece her grandfather had written, but never performed. The melody started quiet, almost hesitant, then grew, tender, fierce, alive. Outside the windows, the city lights flickered in rhythm. The empty seats seemed to listen. When the last note faded, Maya stood for a long time, eyes closed, letting the silence settle. It wasn't the silence of absence anymore. It was the silence of peace. She tucked the sheet music back into her case, knowing she'd perform it one day, not for approval, not for revenge, but for legacy, years later. When people spoke of Evercrest Academy, they no longer described it as a fortress. They called it the school where truth found its sound, and every new student who entered those halls heard the same story. The night a girl, named Maya Carter, picked up a violin and played, until the walls themselves learned to listen. The years that followed unfolded like the long, lingering echo of a perfect note. Maya's name began to travel far beyond Evercrest, mentioned in articles, whispered in conservatories, studied in classrooms. Yet she never chased the spotlight. She used it like light through a window, letting it fall on others who had been waiting in the dark. The recognition program grew into something no one had imagined. It wasn't just a local initiative anymore. Schools across the state began sending their students to Evercrest for workshops. Maya traveled between cities carrying her grandfather's violin like a flag, teaching that talent wasn't born in privilege but in persistence. Everywhere she went, she met students who reminded her of herself, quiet kids watching from the back of the room, unsure whether their place was inside or outside the circle. To each of them, she said the same thing. You already belong. The sound you carry is your proof. But as her influence spread, so did the weight of expectation. Invitations poured in. Interviews, concerts, programs, lectures. The world wanted her to speak as much as it wanted her to play. Somewhere in the middle of it all, she realized she hadn't played for herself in months. One winter evening, she returned to Evercrest, unannounced. Snow blanketed the campus lawn, softening every sound. She walked through the main hall, the same hall where donors once whispered and students once sneered. Now the walls were lined with portraits of students from her program, smiling, proud, unafraid. Inside the auditorium, a small rehearsal was underway. A group of children practiced one of her grandfather's jazz pieces, laughing every time their rhythm faltered. Watching them, Maya felt the tightness in her chest ease. She sat quietly in the last row until they finished, then applauded softly. The children turned, startled, then gasped as they recognized her. "You're Miss Carter," one of them shouted. "You made this school famous." Maya smiled. "No," she said gently. "You will." They swarmed her with questions. And she stayed for hours, tuning instruments, showing them how to breathe before a difficult note, telling them stories about the first time she ever played on that stage. When the hall finally emptied, she stayed behind, the old silence of the place settling around her like an old friend. Her violin case waited in the same spot as it had years ago. She opened it and touched the wood, the familiar warmth blooming beneath her fingertips. She lifted the instrument not for an audience, not for applause, but for herself. And as she played, she realized the story wasn't ending here. It was circling back to where it began. The melody was her grandfather's Freedom in D minor, but this time she added her own phrases, notes he had left unwritten, spaces she could finally fill. Each sound carried the weight of everything that had come before, the laughter that once mocked her, the applause that redeemed her, the thousands of small victories that had followed. When the final chord hung in the air, a quiet voice came from the doorway. "That piece never sounded finished before," said Professor Lennox. His hair was almost white now, his voice softer than she remembered. "But tonight it does." Maya lowered her bow. "Maybe it was waiting for both of us to listen." He smiled faintly. "You taught me that listening is harder than teaching." She set the violin down and joined him at the door. Outside, the snow had begun again, falling in wide, slow flakes. The campus lights glowed gold against the white. Students hurried across the courtyard, laughter echoing off the old walls. Maya watched them, her heart full. "Do you ever think about how different this place feels now?" she asked. Lennox nodded. "It feels alive. It feels honest." She took one last look at the stage through the doorway, the place where everything had changed. That's all music ever needed to be. The next morning, Maya packed her things for a new city. The National Conservatory had asked her to lead a project that connected underprivileged youth with professional orchestras across the country. It was bigger than Evercrest, bigger than her, but that was the point. Before she left, she stopped once more at the East Wing. The small, forgotten room where she had played in secret now held a plaque on the wall. It read, "This is where courage first spoke through strings." She laughed softly, tracing the words with her fingertips. Then she whispered to the empty room, "Keep listening." When she stepped outside, the morning sun broke through the clouds, glinting off the snow. The road ahead was long, but she walked it without hesitation, her violin case swinging gently at her side. Somewhere in the distance, she imagined her grandfather's voice, proud and steady, saying, "You found the stage, Maya. Now build more." She smiled to herself and kept walking. The music would continue.